Here we are, live Monday. What's today? September 8th. Oh, goodness.
Already.
My goodness. 9th
Flying.
month. Oh, my goodness. I thought we just said Happy New Year not long ago. Well, everybody, welcome to BioBridge, where we talk about how to connect Japan and the rest of the world in the life science niche. And today, we have another fantastic guest, somebody I've admired for a few months now. I've been stalking her, every post that she puts on the LinkedIn, and she knows her beep, like really well, and not just
knows
not
her
just
business.
Not just clinical
Thanks,
operations
Tetsu.
really well, but really it's her fluency also in the Japan market, and we want to know all about her experience running clinical studies outside and inside Japan. And well, why don't we start there? Well, hello, Suzanne. Thank you for taking the time with us.
And let me say hello as well. So sorry. Yeah,
No
just
worries.
wanted to welcome you, and thank you for spending some time with us.
Such a pleasure. Thank you both for inviting me on. I've been chatting quite a bit with Tetsu and seen a couple of other episodes. So really happy to be here today to dig into clinical trial operations in Japan and just some of the key differences that we see in Japanese trials versus working in the US or really the rest of the world, frankly. Japan really stands out as being very unique in the clinical trial space, as I know you both are very, very well aware.
Yeah, good. Coming from you, there's so much more weight because we who ran clinical studies inside Japan, we always say we're special, we're different. This is not how it's done elsewhere in the world, but it carries more weight when it's somebody from like yourself who see the clinical trials, how it's run everywhere around the world, and you still say Japan is that black sheep, right?
Yes, a black sheep or a unicorn. I don't know what term you want to use, but it is probably the most unique place I've ever worked in clinical operations and clinical trials, and I have been in close to 50 countries. Over the years. That's a fair amount of countries. And yeah, Japan it really stands out to me as being very unique. And I think if you're folding Japan into your clinical development program, or if you're trying, of course, to enter the Japanese market, there are some really important considerations that you have to be aware of just operating there. And they differ significantly from, I think, what we're used to here in the US or really operating anywhere else. And it's not just the operations, it's also the culture that's so incredibly different and specific. I remember the first time I worked for a company, teeny tiny biotech company. I happened to be the only American. It was a US based company, but I was the only non-Japanese person there. And the colleague at a vendor gave me a document, a publication on how to work with the Japanese. And I thought, doesn't seem like it should be that complicated. But, over time, that experience really stood out to me as trying to navigate, that role. But just also everyone in that company was born and bred in Japan. And it's just different, So I had some really cool opportunities, to get to know the culture that way, meals and meetings. Oh gosh, this first experience is more than 10 years ago, 10, 15 years ago. And really got to, get to know that culture a little bit, go to the CEO's house and enjoy meals and sake and such with them, which was quite something.
But whoa. Let's take a step back. First, but who are you?
All right, that's a great place to start. Now we're minutes into this thing.
Because yes, we want to know.
Yeah, let me back up. It's just such a great topic. It's good to jump in. My name's Suzanne Vyvoda. Thanks for inviting me on, you guys. Again, really a pleasure to be here. I currently am the CEO and founder of a company called Concordia BioStrategies, where I'm really focused on clinical operations and how we can best deliver clinical trials moving forward, in a holistic, harmony-centric way that's very focused on partnerships, breaking down the barriers, the silos, the fragmentation we see, and supporting not only biotechs, but biotech partners, conduct the cleanest, most efficient clinical trials that we can. I've spent the past 20 years, 20 plus years, it's been 20 years for a while now, so it's not quite 20 years anymore, longer than I want to admit, really sitting across all sides of this ecosystem. I've worked at clinical trial sites. I've worked at a CRO. I've worked in large pharma, small biotech startups that no one's ever heard of. And so I've gotten to see this industry kind of from a 360-degree angle. And so my perspective really reflects really focusing on bringing sites, CROs, vendors, sponsors together for stronger partnerships, because we all operate in such different models. We complain about how long clinical trials take, how expensive they are, but we don't necessarily get to the root of why. And so a lot of the things you'll see that I talk about on LinkedIn are really trying to break down those barriers and bring us all together as an ecosystem.
Incredible.
So what kind of clients do you generally work with, and at what stage do they really start talking to you?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one audience would be small biotechs, and that could be anywhere as early as seed stage through typically Series A. I certainly work with bigger companies, but usually by the time they've moved past those initial stages, they have an established operations team, and they don't necessarily need someone, with one exception, and I'll get to that. I help companies as early as, well pre-IND, when they need some operational expertise in terms of what their clinical development program is going to look like from an operations perspective. There are lots of tips and tricks in terms of making your protocol operationally viable, making sure that a site can operationalize it, making sure that the right vendor partnerships are thought of upfront, and really thinking as many steps ahead as you can. The reality is, it's not just a first-in-human trial. It's often thinking about what those next trials are going to look like in order to be most efficient. And sometimes that may sway things like CRO selection or other vendor selection or geographies, et cetera. And so we really want to think as early on in the development program as we can, how operations are actually going to look and feel. I also get involved sometimes when things go off the rails. All of a sudden you have a trial that is very behind in enrollment. The CRO is underperforming. You have a vendor setup that's a mess. I also come in and help companies fix things when they're just not going the way that they thought. There's a lot of reasons why, of course, that happens. And I won't spend a ton of time getting into that. I also support some of the partners that we see across the biotech ecosystem. Think CROs, site networks, tech vendors, folks that are trying to operate within the biotech ecosystem within clinical trials, and they may not have the subject matter expertise to navigate some of those relationships. I also support companies that are trying to enter that market or navigate that market for one reason or another.
Quite cool.
Do a lot.
So I have a lot on my plate at any given moment is the short answer. But I love working with a variety of different partners. Early stage companies have always been, I think, a passion project for me, and you're really getting to put your stamp on a clinical development program. It's that, that partner to the science. Operations, I always see it as a real partner to the medicine, to the science that makes a good clinical trial work, makes it get great data. You want those inflection points that are going to drive value for a company, et cetera. So I really see it as a partnership.
So let's dig into what you mentioned earlier about Japan.
All right, let's dig into it.
Your first experience was about 10, 15 years ago. But before I do it, I do want to acknowledge everybody who's watching right now on LinkedIn with us. Thank you very much for joining. We do have about a dozen or so people watching right now, and mostly your fans. I do have a little comment here from Amanda. It says it just says LinkedIn user, but I can see on LinkedIn that this is Amanda. And she says, I love the approach, Susan Vyvoda. I am a big fan, and I am a big fan. And I'm sure Ibrahim is growing into one right now.
I'll become a fan, yeah. Probably.
Many thanks. That's a wonderful comment, Amanda. Hello. Yes, absolutely know who that is. So great to have you on today, and great to have this conversation with you guys.
Thank you. So little company with a Japanese company gave you this first initiation to the Japanness of business.
Yes, that's correct. That's correct.
But from there on to today, that's 10, 15 years, you said. This is a small company, and then there's CROs, and then there's other experience. Tell us about, it's kind of the overall, and then later we'll get into the anecdotes and stuff, but kind of overall experience.
So that was a very specific instance. That was a preclinical company that was planning, for their first in human trials. It was a company focused on a variety of different vaccines. They're focused on vaccine development. Fast forwarding a little bit, I was running really, really large global phase 3 trials in UC and Crohn's disease for a very large company. And Japan was a really key component of that program. So in that case, we had a Japan-specific CRO that, we had a global CRO, a Japan-specific CRO, actually another regional-specific CRO as well. And across those two different indications, more than 1,000 patients per indication, for a pre-registration. And of course, that required a lot of, interaction with PMDA. That required a fair amount of meetings in person with the CRO. And then, of course, we did investigator meetings for the trial. We did those live in Japan. Tetsu's heard this from me before. Investigator meetings are a bit of a pet peeve for me. And so I learned, I sort of learned this firsthand, because I don't like to farm that out to my CROs. I like to be very, very involved in investigator meetings. I think the sponsor has a responsibility, really, regardless of what country it is. But the sponsor has a responsibility to show up, to be there, to present, to interact with the sites, to build relationships with them. And so I've never been one to just hire a CRO and say, here's the investigator meeting, you organize it, you run it, you do it. I get really involved. I have my teams really involved in those meetings. And that proved to be really, really important when we went to Japan. Mainly, again, because of those cultural differences that we've seen. And you guys can comment on what you've seen from the inside. What I learned from that experience is, wow, you really have to go there. You have to meet them. You have to sit in a conference room with that CRO. You have to go and talk to the investigators. You have to really, it's so culturally different. It's about building relationships. It's not speed and milestones and transactions the way it often is here in the US. And, it's just a crash course in trying to do the same thing, but in a completely different world. I called it a different planet in the post that I did, talking about the session that we were going to have today, because that is almost how it felt. It's like stepping off the plane into another world.
At some point, I'm going to have to ask you, if it's all worth it to go into Japan.
Well, you can definitely ask me that. Yeah. I will have my own operational take on it. But, I think at the end of the day, there are these countries out there, right, where you have to operate in that country if you plan to commercialize as part of your development plan. And Japan is certainly one of them. So, if you are going to ignore that market altogether, which, depending on the indication, obviously, there's strategies to go one way versus another. But if you plan to go into Japan, you have to get in there, and you have to get in there really early. The PMDA expects that, because it is that relationship building. They want to know who you are. They want to know why Japan. They want to know, what your long-term plans are. And so, that's a huge component of operations there. It's that relationship building with the regulators, with the sites, et cetera.
Have you sat in these PMDA meetings?
I've actually never sat through a PMDA meeting myself. I've been, of course, part of prepping for them, reviewing for them. Definitely been live in meetings with the CRO, meetings with Japanese partners, et cetera. Like I said, those investigator meetings where, we actually did go to Japan and conduct them there were really well received. And that was a really great experience too, to just be in the country and try the food and talk to the people. And gosh, it's It is. It's a different world. It's just there's so many cultural nuances, and you guys will know this a lot better than I do. But I mean, for example, I would never think in the US about who sits where in a car or a taxi. That would never, ever occur to me. It would never occur to me. And I know very well that there is a very specific spot I'm going to have to sit if I get in a taxi in Japan with a group of Japanese folks. And that's just a nuance that how would you ever think or know about that if you're not kind of briefed on what to expect going in? And what I will say is these larger companies, they do a pretty good job of having people orient you as to what to expect when you're actually going to go visit a country. Smaller companies, of course, it's trial by fire. You just figure it out. But those larger companies, if you're going to travel somewhere that has specific cultural norms, they do a good job of educating you beforehand. Thankfully, I knew all of that going in, but that just it's those little things that people are going to miss that will matter.
Yeah, some things just sound like unreal.
Yeah.
You don't really do that. Yes, we do.
Yeah, for sure.
No, you don't take that seat at the dinner table. That's not for you.
Yeah, seriously. Even just for not just that seat, but who gets served when, where. You think about an investigator meeting. You think about the investigator reception, and then in the US, it's just kind of a free for all, right? Everyone is just they just kind of have at it. That's completely fine. That's what we expect. That's what we know. Sponsor. Otherwise, for me, I'm usually one to hang back anyway, because I don't want to be just charging at the food if it's my meeting. But you literally can't do that in Japan. You got to get out of that line. Even if it's something simple like that. It's a different world, and going in there prepared, I think sets a company up for a lot more success in that clinical trial journey. As you kick that off in Japan, as you start to enroll patients, if you've made a good impression on those investigators, on those sites, that makes all the difference.
Prepared is a good word. Amanda continues with what we were talking about a little bit earlier. I think it's so important, especially when we started years ago in Japan. It was integral in moving the trial along. And you were mentioning, this came in when you were talking about preparations with the PMDA. It takes time. Yeah. So it's not like when you're ready for your FPI in the US and you go, oh, as an afterthought, why don't we add Japan?
No.
It's a bit late for that.
Yeah. Very, very true. Very, very true. And I found that, going back to my earlier point, and that's why involving operations in these discussions early on can be so important. Your medicine and your science, of course, is going to point the direction of your protocol, is going to point the direction of your population. But thinking about these things way up front, what regulatory interactions do I want to have? Where do I want to commercialize that? We get very focused on what that first in human is, that first patient dosed. It's actually more important to think about the last patient that's dosed at the end of the day, whether it be a trial or the entire development program, really, because you'll never get there in an efficient, cost-effective manner if you're having to kind of pivot at all of these different inflection points along the way.
Indeed. So let's get into some anecdotes. I'm sure you've got some stuff in there that's very funny. It's shocking. Investigator meetings. I've got a ton from investigator meetings too. I think just having to pivot at the last minute. I think one anecdote I'll share, would be menus. We plan menus for investigator meetings. What we would do in the US is we would. Again, it's a free for all. There's coffee in the hallway. There's a big hall for lunch. You have that investigator reception for dinner. In Japan, we can't do that. So it's this mad scramble of first trusting your CRO to help you navigate the culture. And again, in this case, in most of these cases, I've had a Japan-specific CRO. That does complicate things operationally to have more than one CRO. But you do need a CRO that knows how to navigate Japan, regardless of whether that's a global partner or something that's more niche, whether you're going to split up
your CRO oversight, from more than one partner. That's a conversation for another day. I have a lot of opinions about that too. But I mean, scrambling to adapt menus at hotels where we're hosting these investigator meetings, like, no, we literally cannot serve this. I don't care that you've already made it. You have to serve something else. And so that's one thing that comes to mind. The cab thing, cabs pulling up and the scramble that sort of happens. And you see everyone else is just like the other cab up front, everyone else just knows exactly. And a whole bunch of white people standing there thinking, okay, where do I go? Am I here? I was here in the last cab, but I'm not there in this cab. I'm actually over here. And you just sort of see these American faces kind of looking up like, oh, right, I'm over here, just dumbfounded or just, oh gosh, even the order in which you climb up a stairwell or an escalator. Americans, we're in a hurry. We're always just running up, and that is not how you do it. It was just every little navigation, every little thing. You have to think about it. You have to think about where you sit in that cab, where you sit at the table, how you address the audience. What the formalities that you use to address professors, physicians, etc. Ibrahim, I know you'll appreciate that. Seating arrangements. Yeah. So every time you walk into a room, you're like, all right, what room is this? Where am I? What is it that I'm supposed to be doing? And you do that in a different way than you would here. I think Americans were very comfortable winging it. Either we're introverted and we sit against the wall, or we're extroverted and we charge right in. It doesn't matter because we just sort of do our thing our way. We can't do that in Japan. And those nuances where you kind of get caught, like, I don't know, almost red face, like, my eyes always just pop out like, yikes, okay, that's not the right thing, backpedal really quickly. So I'm just thinking of things like that, just shuffling into a conference room and we're all against the wall trying to figure out who's supposed to sit where and so on and so forth. It doesn't matter, whether you practice always or not. Sometimes rooms are set up differently, right? So those are the things that are coming to mind. But I do think practicing is a good thing maybe to encourage here as we're having this conversation. Those things, they sound so insane. They feel like they can't be true. They're true. So practicing up front, who's going to sit where, how all that's going to work is something that I really do recommend. And then I really recommend that sponsors get in front of those investigator meetings, get in front of the CROs, go to Japan, see the people, eat the food, ask the questions. You're going to get much more out of your experience.
Totally agree. It's better for you to go there, make some mistakes, people understand, but show your sincerity, I guess, and your openness to the Japanese culture and the Japanese investigators. That goes a long way, because I've had investigator meetings where they just send in like a mid-level project manager and the director's not there, the medical monitor's not there, and it's like just treated like a little country when it's like 20% of your enrollment. So that kind of stuff, I think, is also important. You don't have to be perfect. And nobody expects you to be perfect, but opening your mind to it, I think it's very important. And
so I have a question. What sort of consequences have you guys seen from these missteps? Like, I'd love to know.
Well, I'll tell you. Number one, they move much slower than they'll normally move. They just deprioritize whatever it is that you're doing if you're not going to play by their rules. This is our country, our rules. Learn, or again, be curious, be adaptable, or we have other trials. And I think about the UC Crohn space, it's really crowded. There are a ton of trials going on in that space at any given time. You want attention, you have to go in and be respectful and understand that you're setting the stage for really these long-term relationships. I also want to emphasize that point about the medical director and having your chief medical officer, your medical director there. Again, Ibrahim, you'll appreciate this. to actually have one-on-one conversations with the investigators, to interact with them and talk about the medicine, talk about the patients, talk about the science. Sometimes that doctor to doctor is much more important. And really that's true in any country. But in Japan, they want to know that you're going to meet their respect with your respect by showing up with that peer.
Yeah, I think that's especially true in Japan, culturally speaking. Yeah, very good point.
Indeed.
Yeah, that's definitely something that really, I think, made our programs successful. You know, we had investigators or medical directors, folks within the sponsor that were very engaged and very willing to meet that moment, willing to learn the culture, go out and try the food, just enjoy it. So I've been lucky that way to have folks that would engage, with me in Japan, but that's not always the case. And so I just would say then proceed with caution. And again, plan way in advance. You know, we're used to these IRB, FDA timelines. That's not how Japan works. So do your homework. And really,
how
some of these things are like
not. Some of these things are just like so out there. It's definitely these operational, common sense things for Japanese people are just completely out there for foreigners. So, you know, even these IRB meetings, you know, it's not just one IRB meeting. You go to the site like 4 or 5 times to talk to the clinical trial office, and then like every decisive meeting is almost just ceremonial. Like everything sort of gets done before that. No.
Such a great point. The monitoring process is very, very different. And so if you're not prepared, again, with that CRO to go in there and, you know, meet the Japanese site expectations, you're going to have a really, really tough time. And Tetsuo, I'll flip it on you since you've been in that country. You know, tell me what you've seen. What strikes you as most dramatically different between, you know, US expectations or the expectations of US based sponsors and the Japanese?
No, it's almost easier to name things that aren't different.
I love that. Yeah, you know?
But I think we can sort of bundle into various categories. Like respect is something that you mentioned earlier. This doctor to doctor discussion. It's a form of respect. Showing up, you know, coming to the country and showing, you know, this is our study. Please take care of us. If you make a mistake, have a senior person go to the site and apologize. There's actually apology visits that are built into the Japan costing rules where we were before. And there's, you know, site management time is usually much higher in the costing in Japan for established companies who've been there for a while, who've learned through experience. In the US, you maybe have like a few hours for a month, but in Japan, it's like, you know, almost 20 hours, 10, 20 hours for every month.
Yeah, so it's such an important point, you know, thinking about your budget. You know, when you hear, okay, conducting trials in Japan is expensive. Well, it's things like these that are real cost drivers. It's not just visits are more expensive. It's that the intensity with which we have to interact with the site is much more expansive. And that, you know, those hours add up. They just do. And if we're not going to conduct trial again, if we're not going to follow their rules, we're not going to see patients enrolled. And you mentioned your point about 20% of patients. That's a really critical point. If you want to commercialize your product there are minimum requirements that you have to meet usually in a Japanese population. Exactly. So that's huge. So if your enrollment then seems sort of stalled, you've got some explaining to do, or you've got some relationship building potentially to address.
We have some more questions and comments. We have Amir. Amir asked about the food, not just the cultural aspects of food, but actually in a study. As far as I knew, the food is not funded by government, so the universities always where companies fund the food in any assembly, and that's true. Yeah, we do SIVs. We order bento boxes piles of mental boxes.
Yes, absolutely.
Also,
And we
one
don't
way to attract the people to come to the meetings.
100%. We used to see a lot more of that in the US. That obviously has slowed way down due to the regulations as they've changed in the US, but that is not something that we see in Japan as an evolution. It is, again, something that's very built in. We can't provide, we have to be very cognizant of what we provide to US sites in terms of really anything, food or otherwise.
Same thing in Japan, but there's ways around it. Like, you cannot have like a seated dinner, but you can have like a standing dinner, things like that, where it's not like a per head, but more like a group thing. But taxi.
Absolutely.
There's various ways around that, but it is definitely more and more regulated, just like it is in the U.S. These medical reps going out on golf rounds of golf, or frowned upon.
I actually want to ask Ibrahim, I'd love to just ask you, since you're a physician and you have a sort of different angle on this than Tetsu and I will. I don't want to hijack, but I'd love your take on clinical development in Japan and kind of what you've seen as some of the key differences from a physician's perspective.
Yeah, no, really good question. I would say, unfortunately, I would say, my experience is quite limited in that, in that I've done more business development type activities rather than actual clinical development in Japan. My experience, actually, I've done a lot of practice of medicine with Japanese patients in the US. So from that experience, what I could say is, the medical standard also, there's a different sort of thinking as well. Like there's, in the US, you would say a lot of practice gets driven by, malpractice and, defensive medicine. In Japan, there's a little bit of a different nuance there. So that changes, although the medical standard might be the same, the approach to a patient changes. So I think given that, I would go back to the point that you made, that is probably why it's really important for sponsors and peer-to-peer type of discussions, rather than kind of a top-down kind of discussion that might occur between vendors or investigators.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thanks for that context. I always enjoy sort of learning different perspectives on this because it is such a nuanced place to work. I just cognizant of time. Are there other questions, Tetsu, that we need to get to here?
Not from the crowd, but
okay, cool.
I don't know. I just have a few questions just lined up, but I think our discussion can go anywhere, really.
Sure. Sounds good to me.
I'm really interested in what you put out a few weeks ago about IROs. Maybe for the audience, you could sort of explain what are IROs, and I want to know if it's something you think could work in Japan.
Sure. So, I think
what is an IRO? Yeah, let's start there.
Great question. Yeah, great question. And I think biotech is at an interesting inflection point right now. We have a really different way of working. Investors are looking much more scrutiny at anything they're going to put their money in. It is much harder to raise money. It's harder to run trials. And IRO refers to an integrated research organization. It's not a CRO. But I mean, if you look at clinical operations teams, for example, within sponsors, there are usually tons of people, and there are reasons for that. Some companies run lean, some companies have a ton of people, but when we think about that team and the traditional way we would grow a company, hire a head of clinical operations, they hire a director, they hire CTMs, they hire CTAs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Then the company grows. The company may have to reduce that team along the way, depending on what happens at the company. And so the idea here is really to have a group of people at different levels of expertise that you could integrate into an organization, into a sponsor, and be kind of embedded within the sponsor, but also independent from the sponsor. So hours could flex up and down depending on what the sponsor's needs really are for a trial, one trial or another trial, et cetera. Maybe they need senior level strategic expertise, but maybe they don't need it once the trial kicks off. Maybe they need more tactical expertise at that point. Having one person means you're locked into that person's rate, that person's salary, their benefits, etc. But if you had a modular team where you could have different folks involved at different capacities at different points in a clinical trial, and I think clinical operations is one place where that model I think works particularly well, just because you do need sort of that workforce. You do need senior level strategy and operations, but you also need folks that are going to make sure that your CRO is running according to plan, that your contracts are negotiated, that your sites are overseen, that the vendor work that's done is appropriate, that your TMF is audit ready. There's so much that goes into clinical operations that we don't know necessarily all those nuances, but we don't need that workforce to be an FTE necessarily for the entire course of a trial or a development program.
Yeah,
that's really what I'm getting at there.
Yeah, no, I really think this is great. I mean, I mentioned this to you before. I always thought, big companies with all the functions that used to be, how it was at these mega pharmas. They had their CRAs internally. They've had all the sales team, and everybody was in there. Now it's all kind of like becoming modular, and then you can have a sales force in-sourced, or you can have a CRAs like that. And I was thinking the extreme case of that is you'll have like a really, just a very, very core number of people at these so-called mega pharmas, and then they would manage specific functions outward. But that's kind of, I think that's too extreme. Like just a few core would be very difficult to go from there to manage all the functions at the extremities, and that IRO is like that buffer between.
And that's sort of how I've seen it, Tatsu. I've seen it work well, especially in these teeny tiny startups where they have to account for CMC or maybe a fair amount of preclinical work or clinical operations or what have you, but they can't necessarily bring on 20 FTEs, nor do they need them necessarily. But exploring sort of novel ways to address getting the work done and getting it done with the right amount of seniority, expertise, that's tricky to do. So I think this market is demanding some more flexible ways to do that. We've seen the rise of fractional executives a lot in the industry. That's one place where, that's almost the same kind of model. It's integrating, a CFO. You have someone that has that wealth of financial expertise, but doesn't work for you full time. So you don't have the overhead of that person's, again, salary and benefits. You're still getting the benefit of that person's expertise. And maybe that person is supporting, 4 other companies at the same capacity. So
the startup, rather than the startup going out and finding a fractional CFO, a fractional CEO, a fractional COO, your IRO would have these people already kind of in the team, in a task force.
Right. So, I mean,
so they
that's
well
sort of
they've already,
vetted people. And so the way this looks right now in practice is it's very clinical operations focused. I'm starting to think about expanding that. I do have some partnerships that are in development with some folks that do provide some of these, lateral services. So, I know a group that does an amazing job with CMC and quality, for example, one that's really focused on biostats, one that's focused on regulatory, for example. And so, yes, I mean, the idea eventually with something like this is that you could have this vetted team of operators either with lateral breadth or depth in a certain, piece of that work in order to make really your costing much more efficient.
Absolutely. All right, we do have another question coming up from Hamid Trimek. So do you think Japan should put tax incentives to foreign companies to attract clinical trials here in Japan? Kind of like Australia, New Zealand. Australia has this tax kickback that's like 43%. Everybody's going to Japan, to Australia for this. You have to set up a local entity, but we don't do that in Japan. In Japan, we have other types of incentives, government programs, but not taxes. What do you think about tax incentives? Have you any experience in Australia?
I've had a lot of experience in Australia. I think it's working really, really well there. I think part of it, though, is there are differences in the type of work that it's working best for. You know, we see a lot of early stage trials in Australia, first in human, phase 1B. The demography there is very similar to the US. Right. And so it's become a good alternative to running trials in the US. Japan looks so different. From a demography perspective, from a regulatory perspective too. It's really, really fast to open trials in Australia, not so fast to open trials in Japan. So some of the things that, you know, really strike me as huge advantages of this Australia or New Zealand model, to me, don't translate really well to Japan. I think you really have to be there because, you know, whatever your indication is prevalent enough in the Japanese population to make it commercially viable there. And it's not really a speed angle. So I think if you're going there because there's really a Japanese specific application. That's my view on it. I certainly would welcome your views as well.
No, that's a great point. And it is only for phase 1, maybe a very small phase 2. It's like $20 million or something like that. I think that you can take advantage of. So it's definitely not for like a phase 3 pivotal where you're trying to put a little bit of Japanese patients into your pivotal.
Exactly.
So it's the angle is completely different. Like you say, people don't typically go to Japan for phase 1 or first in human. If not the opposite, Japanese companies would go outwards.
Exactly.
To the US. So yeah, I'm fully aligned in that it may not work quite as well, but instead Japan does have these different programs. Like one I know very well from AMED. It's called the Strengthening Program for Pharmaceutical Startup Ecosystem, and it's a long description, but it's very clear. It's a lot of money for the pharma startup ecosystem. So if you're a startup in Japan, you get some money from investors like VCs. These are registered VCs with AMED. AMED is essentially the NIH of Japan. So if let's say you get $10 million from AMED, from your VC, AMED will put another 20 million on top of that. It's like a double matching whatever the VC puts in. This is a huge way for the Japanese government to try to incentivize.
Yes, absolutely. And thanks for outlining that. You know, you and I spoke about that a little while back, and I agree. I think that's as effective, if not potentially more effective, potentially than Australia's program.
Yeah, I would agree. Yep. And, you know, to your point actually about Australia as well, Suzanne, you know, I wanted to echo that is that, you know, we've actually, so, you know, my company, Embark Healthcare that I work for, or work in, we've taken advantage of the Australian tax incentives. And, you know, one thing is that it's real. Like you actually get that 43% back. So that's there. And then, you know, I think there is unfortunately a bottleneck that does occur is that, you know, the population in Australia is kind of small at the end of the day. So, you know, there is a lot of attraction to get started there, but, you know, how big a trial can go, can get in Australia, unfortunately, might be a little bit limited.
Yeah, I've seen that too. You know, the first in human works really well, but you go to a 1B and you want to do it in patients, you're all of a sudden having to go to other geographies right there out of the gates. Even if your demography, I think about obesity as an example. We have a lot of obese patients in the US. We have a lot of that in Australia. But even for a modest 1B trial that I scoped for a client recently, that 1B really wouldn't be efficient to run in Australia. Even though their demography really looks like ours, to your point, it's just a smaller country. So you're already looking at, you know, ex-Australia expansion, and maybe you're trying to do that in one protocol. You're already sort of diluting, you know, that approach. So, you know, I think there are great advantages to that program. I'm a big fan of it myself. I think a lot of people are going that way. I've seen it too. You really do get that. You really do get that that rebate, but also just the speed to start up. You know, you're going to get that first patient in much sooner. I think that's a huge benefit to companies too, who are looking, you know, again, to demonstrate value, to show those inflection points to their investors.
Yeah. And then I do want to point out though, our Australian sites actually happen to always punch above their weight in terms of enrollment. So there is that surprise element too, that we were very surprised that they were much better at enrolling with just a handful of sites compared to like twice the number of sites in the US. So there are
Definitely
surprises
true.
out there as well.
Yeah, and that's a great point. I think that they're really trying to meet the moment. They're really trying to demonstrate that they are in this to be a real player in clinical development. Globally, they're definitely trying to show up and demonstrate that through this program. And I think with feasibility, the U.S. Unfortunately, I think number one, there's so much competition. Number two, feasibility isn't, well, that's a whole conversation for another day in terms of why feasibility is broken, in my opinion. But it's this issue sort of garbage in, garbage out, and it's static information. And sites here in the US, they want to get business, and that's certainly not wrong by any means. But there's often not necessarily the right amount of thought that goes into the feasibility process on the behalf of the sponsor and or CRO or the site. So that's a conversation for another day.
Yeah, I think if we go too deep into the operations, we're never gonna get out.
We'll never get off the phone.
But I know time is we're rounding to 3/4 of an hour now, and but I can't let this one go before we wrap up. It's a very key word, but I don't want us to dig too deep. It's AI. And
oh my goodness.
All right, but hear me. It's not general. What do you think about AI in clinical trials? No. I'm thinking, do you think AI can help us overcome some of these gaps to understanding Japan through I don't know, like I was mentioning earlier, my email manager, I have an interface, like a chat box interface, something like that could allow, I don't know, project managers, if we're going into Japan, what do you think about this? Is this do something? It's just simple stuff like that to other automated stuff. I don't know. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, the first thought off the top of my head is, hey, I'm flying to Tokyo tomorrow. What do I need to know? Just randomly, like knowing enough to ask ChatGPT, what do I need to know about this culture? When I set foot in Japan, I think that's even a powerful thing to use AI for.
Already.
But I think beyond that, I mean, the short answer is absolutely. The longer answer, of course, is how do we do so in a way that has the right guardrails attached, is thoughtful, is contained when it needs, when and where it needs to be contained, and is compliant. I think those are the big, kind of scary red flags that tend to come up in conversations regarding AI, at least currently. But you're right, that's a deep rabbit hole to go down. But I like the idea of, again, just awareness. If you're a PM or a CRA or whatever your role might be, and you're going to, for some reason, touch down in Japan for a conference or a meeting or whatever the case may be, just typing into ChatGPT, hey, what do I need to know about? What's this thing I heard about cabs? Just chatting a little bit to get to know a little bit more about what to expect if you're working for a company that's not going to give you that cultural overview before you actually travel.
Yeah.
Great point.
Any thoughts, Ibrahim?
No, that's a great point. And I've been wanting to say this from the beginning of the conversation today, but after all these years, Suzanne, you finally made me realize why I'm always the last person into a cab. And it's not the hierarchy. It's actually me trying to figure out the pecking order, even in the US. And this is having grown up in Japan and coming to the US, I guess it's been ingrained in my brain that this is what you're supposed to do. So to my colleagues, this is why I'm always the last person in.
That's so interesting. That's so interesting. I mean, here I admit, classic American, I just charge for the cab. I'm just going to go where I'm going to go. And so I do have to stop and think twice. And so, I mean, I think ChatGPT, all of these tools, they've really changed just how we access information. And I think being able to query it, how do I prepare for my trip to Japan is a really simplistic thing that anyone can make use of. Doesn't require any specific software or guardrails. It's just an easy way to make sure that maybe some of the things you haven't thought of or aren't aware of, can get surfaced before that flight.
Yeah. And I think, you mentioned the word curiosity. I really like that word that you use, like approach it with curiosity. And we've been talking about US or rest of the world going into Japan, but I do want to echo that as sort of, an insider from Japan as well. Like I'd like to echo that to the Japanese folks as well. Like please approach your business to the rest of the world with curiosity as well. Because, I would say, we as a Japanese, I would say, is we approach a lot of things, we've kind of been bred as with some rigidity as well. So like we need to kind of soften up that rigidity and approach it with curiosity as well. So just flipping the script a little bit. Sorry.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. I think that's important really for any culture. I mean, the reality is so much of what we do in clinical development is global. And whether it's Japan or the US or another country, another region that we may not be familiar with, approaching that region with interest and curiosity rather than, being, I think Americans always are accused of being very America-centric. But I think we all can benefit from that approach as we work globally, regardless of the work that we're doing.
Well said.
Well. It does sound like we're wrapping up. And I did have one, but I think we've already done it. It's like, I want to know if you have like just one key message for companies that are going to Japan for the first time to run a study.
Yeah.
What's one highest value message that you could provide?
It's going to be a tie, Tatsu, between planning early and cultural awareness. That cannot be understated enough, really going in with eyes wide open. So, for me, it's a tie. If I'm going to tell someone, that's going to go into Japan, those are the two messages I really want them to hear.
Thank you very much. Going early gives you a buffer to actually learn and see the little things and maybe have time to readjust if you have to. But great messages. Thank you so much, Susan. We can't pick all of your brain at one section.
Yeah,
we're gonna have to have you back.
Sure, I'd love it.
For other discussions, but today we're gonna have to call it a night. It's almost an hour.
Sounds like a plan. Yes, absolutely. Great session, you guys. Thanks for the invitation. Thanks for having me here, and I'd love to come back. It's such a great topic, and I love the idea of connecting Japan with the rest of the world on both ends, really.
Indeed. And thank you to everybody who's watching, and thank you for all the comments and questions. You can continue to write them into this just under here. There's like questions and comments that you can put in, and we'll try to field them all over time. But otherwise, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
We'll talk to you again.
Everyone have a great evening.
Bye-bye.
Bye.